You wake up in a cold wooden bed. Your mattress is filled with straw, probably harvested by someone who hasn't bathed since the last solar eclipse. The room smells like wet stone, old garlic, and the kind of despair you only get from medieval winters and a chronic lack of indoor plumbing. The single candle flickers, like it's considering whether it wants to keep living. You sit up and stretch. Your back hurts. Your knees hurt. Your soul hurts. But hey, at least the world hasn't ended, yet. You pull on a wool tunic, which scratches like it was specifically engineered by monks who hate skin. Outside, it's misty and gray and generally indistinguishable from a horror film intro. There's mud. So much mud. It's on your shoes, it's on your dog, it's somehow in your soup. You look up at the sky, overcast again. If you squint, you can just about make out a slightly ominous cloud that might look a little bit like a dragon if you're superstitious. Which, spoiler, you are. Everyone is. You think weather is personal. You go about your morning routine, feeding the chickens, cursing gently at the cold, and wondering if this is the day the Four Horsemen will finally roll into town like a morally ambiguous rock band. Because if there's one thing you and everyone you know believe with absolute certainty, it's this: the world is going to end. Maybe today. Maybe tomorrow. Definitely soon. Probably after dinner. Hopefully before tax season. So before you settle in under your itchy wool blanket, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I promise not to unleash pestilence in your direction. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I love knowing if you're listening to this from a cozy bed in Tokyo or a haunted attic in Birmingham. Honestly, it's just nice to know we're all waiting for the apocalypse together. Now, back to you, standing ankle-deep in chicken droppings, squinting at a sky full of apocalyptic potential. The medieval mindset isn't exactly built on optimism. In fact, if optimism ever wandered into a 12th century village, it would be burned as a heretic. You, dear peasant, are raised on a strict diet of barley bread, fear, and the creeping suspicion that everything is God's punishment. Earthquakes? Punishment. Comets? Big, glowing punishments. Bad hair day? You guessed it, punishment. To be fair, the world does seem pretty endy. The crops are dying. The cows have developed attitudes. Last week, old Bertram tried to marry a tree because he thought it was the Virgin Mary. There's a lot happening. And the priests? Oh, the priests are thrilled. Nothing brings a congregation together like a shared fear of cosmic doom. You shuffle to the local church, where the priest is already halfway through a sermon about how the Antichrist is definitely, absolutely, no doubt about it, alive right now and probably owns a suspiciously large pig. Now, let's be clear. When we talk about how medieval people thought the world would end, we're not talking about vague philosophical dread like, oh no, society is collapsing. No, we're talking dragons. Literal dragons. Also, blood moons, rivers turning to blood, raining frogs, the sky cracking open, and Jesus descending on a cloud like the world's most judgmental parachuter. And that's just Monday. Their vision of the apocalypse was heavily shaped by the Book of Revelation, a piece of scripture that reads like someone let a doomsday prepper write a fantasy novel after downing 2 bottles of mead. Fire, beasts, trumpet sounds, earthquakes, just endless divine pyrotechnics. If your medieval brain was a movie theater, Revelation was the summer blockbuster on repeat. And boy, was it graphic. Let's dive deeper. First, we have the Four Horsemen. Not the cool wrestling team, but the symbolic bringers of doom: pestilence, yea, disease, war, fun for no one, famine, your bread just got smaller, and death, self-explanatory. These guys are the medieval equivalent of a Yelp review for humanity. 1 star, would not recommend. But it's not just biblical. There are signs, you see. Signs that the end is near. Signs that you should probably confess to stealing your neighbor's goat before the sky turns to fire. Things like eclipses. In the 14th century, an eclipse was not a normal celestial event. It was an omen, a warning, possibly a portal for demons. You don't just watch it with popcorn, you go to church and cry. Other signs included monstrous births, like a child born with 2 heads or 3 arms, or, worst of all, speaking fluent Latin. A hailstorm in summer? Clearly, Satan's doing. A cow with 2 tails? Someone's definitely been dabbling in sorcery. The medieval world is full of mystery, but mostly the terrifying kind. You didn't need HBO to be scared, you just needed the sky to look slightly weird. Then there were the wandering preachers. These guys made a career out of shouting about the end of the world in town squares while waving bones and occasionally eating insects for dramatic effect. Their message? Repent now, because doom is coming. Their hygiene? Questionable at best. But they were convincing, especially when paired with things like the Black Death, which was less a plague and more a traveling death party that wiped out a third of Europe. Imagine that. You're sitting at home, trying to enjoy your lentil stew, and suddenly the guy next door dies, then your aunt, then the baker, and now the priest is telling you it's definitely the end times. And honestly, it kind of looks like it. You start writing your will on the back of a cabbage leaf because parchment is expensive. Your will mostly says, "Don't touch my spoon." By now, you've probably figured out that the medieval worldview isn't just obsessed with death, it's in a committed relationship with it. You're reminded of it constantly, in sermons, in art, in plays, in that one skull that just sits there in the town square for atmosphere. The Dance of Death, an artistic motif where skeletons invite the living to a cheerful conga line of oblivion, is not just popular. It's a hit. You've probably got one hanging in your hallway. But why this obsession? Simple. Life was fragile. Infant mortality rates were sky high. You could die from a paper cut if it got infected. You could die because a rat sneezed near your bread. You could die from a bad haircut if the barber also dabbled in leech therapy. So naturally, people wanted answers. And they found them in religion, in superstition, and in long, grim stories about how the world would definitely, absolutely end very soon. Let's not forget apocalyptic movements. Sometimes, entire groups would pack their bags, climb a hill, and wait for Jesus to return, like a medieval version of camping for concert tickets, only with more fasting and significantly less merch. These groups, called millenarians, were especially active around the year 1000, because when that calendar flipped, people panicked. It's a nice round number, they said. Surely, God loves round numbers. Spoiler, he did not show up. The world, rudely, did not end. But fear not. There's always another reason to panic. Maybe a star exploded. Maybe someone had a vision. Maybe you found a chicken egg with a weird mark on it that looked vaguely like a demonic emoji. Any of these could be proof that the end was near. You tell your neighbors. They tell their neighbors. Soon the whole town is fasting, praying, and swearing off mead. At least for a week. Of course, not everyone was into the apocalypse. Some folks thought the end was symbolic. Maybe it meant the end of sin, or the end of suffering. Those people were usually philosophers, and they were not invited to most parties. People preferred the dramatic stuff. Fire, brimstone, dragons, possibly locusts wearing tiny helmets. And let's not forget the Antichrist. This guy was the medieval villain of choice. He's supposed to rise up, charm everyone, do miracles, and then ruin everything. Medieval people spent a lot of time debating what he would look like. Some said he'd be beautiful, others said he'd smell like sulfur, and one very creative theory said he'd be born in Babylon with eyebrows that meet in the middle. Because nothing says evil like an unplucked unibrow. You, dear listener, are probably lying in bed right now thinking, this is insane. And you're right, but it made sense to them. They didn't have science, or TikTok, or scented candles. They had darkness, disease, and scripture. And when the world felt chaotic, and it always did, they looked to the sky and said, yup, that's it. We're doomed. But hey, at least supper is soon. And with that, you trudge back home. Your boots are soaked. The sky is still gray. A new sermon is scheduled for tomorrow, and it's titled, The Sins of Pickled Fish and Why They Will Destroy Us All. Your neighbor just bought a goat with one eye and is already spreading rumors. You eat your bread, say your prayers, and fall asleep knowing that even if the world ends tomorrow, at least you won't have to milk the cow again. Sweet dreams. You wake up to the sound of bells. Church bells. Loud, echoing, slightly off-key bells that sound less like a holy call to prayer and more like someone dropped a cow down a stone staircase. You blink. It's still dark. The rooster hasn't even bothered to crow yet. That's never a good sign. Either something's gone terribly wrong, or the rooster gave up on life sometime last night. You pull on your tunic, still damp from yesterday because laundry is for the rich, and shuffle toward the church. On the way, You pass several neighbors clutching rosaries like they're trying to strangle the sin out of them. Nobody's smiling. The air is cold, with that special kind of dampness that seeps into your bones and makes you question all your choices, including that time you ate questionable goat stew. You hear whispers, someone saw a comet. A real one. Bright as fire. Last night, streaking across the sky like a heavenly exclamation mark. Or maybe a cosmic middle finger. Either way, people are convinced it means something. Spoiler, in medieval Europe, everything means something. Especially if it's vaguely scary and up in the sky. You finally reach the church, which is packed. Wall-to-wall wool-clad panic. Father Alfric is at the front, eyes wild, voice cracking, breath smelling faintly of wine and unwashed terror. He's reciting from Revelation again. Not the chill parts, if there were any, but the loud, terrifying, trumpet-blasting parts. You know the ones. 7 trumpets, 7 plagues, 7 bowls of wrath. Because if God's going to smite the earth, he's doing it with flair and a full orchestra. And let's talk about those trumpets for a moment. Because in Revelation, every time an angel blows one, something catastrophic happens. We're not talking, oops, spilled some line levels of disaster. No, we're talking about oceans turning to blood, stars falling from the sky, and giant, flaming mountain things plummeting into the sea. It's like a medieval heavy metal concert, but with more livestock dying and fewer t-shirts. The first trumpet? Hail and fire mixed with blood. Casual. Just blood hail. The kind of weather that makes you want to crawl under your bed and rethink your life choices. Second trumpet? A mountain on fire gets hurled into the sea. Which, first of all, rude. The sea was already salty. Now it's boiling. Third trumpet? A star falls from heaven. It's called wormwood, which sounds like either a poison or the least popular Harry Potter character. Turns out, it's both. It poisons the rivers. Because you weren't already dehydrated enough drinking water from a mossy bucket. The fourth trumpet dims the sun, the moon, and the stars. Basically, the celestial version of turning the lights off and slamming the door on your way out. And then comes the fifth trumpet. And friends, this is where it gets weird. The fifth trumpet unleashes locusts. But not your garden variety ones. No, these locusts come from a bottomless pit, which is already a red flag. They're described as horse-shaped insects with human faces, long hair, lion's teeth, and wings that sound like war chariots. Also, they wear crowns. Because if you're going to be a soul-sucking bug monster, you may as well accessorize. These locusts don't eat crops. They eat people's will to live. Well, not exactly. They sting people and make them suffer for 5 months straight without actually dying. So basically, medieval tax season. Now, let's pause here. Imagine you're a humble 13th century peasant. You're hearing all this in Latin, which you don't understand, but Father Alfric is yelling and sobbing and pointing at a tapestry that's basically just fire and goats. You don't need a degree to get the message. Things are bad. Probably going to get worse. Best to fast and flog yourself a little, just to stay ahead of the curve. The sixth trumpet? More horror. 4 angels are released from the Euphrates River. Yes, the river. Why were angels chained in a river? We don't ask questions. They lead an army of 200 million horsemen. These horses have lion heads and tails like snakes. Fire, smoke, and sulfur shoot from their mouths. It's not clear who's designing these creatures, but they're clearly working overtime on the nightmare shift. The seventh trumpet doesn't even bring relief. It brings more wrath. Because of course it does. There's thunder, lightning, an earthquake, and then a great hailstorm. Because if you're ending the world, you need to hit all the classics. And through it all, you are trying to figure out how to stay alive long enough to finish your barley gruel. You still have to collect firewood. You still have to deal with your cousin Edric, who's convinced the Antichrist is hiding in his chicken coop. By now, you might be wondering, did medieval people really take all this literally? The answer is yes. Absolutely yes. Many believed the trumpets were not symbolic. They were events. Real ones. Happening soon. Maybe already happening. If the weather was weird, if someone sneezed too loud, or if your ox gave you a funny look, it could all be part of the divine countdown. Some believed the trumpets had already begun, that the signs were unfolding in real time. Every famine, every war, every suspicious mole on the back of a royal baby's neck, evidence of the end. Monarchs commissioned paintings of the apocalypse. Monks wrote treatises about which trumpet we were currently suffering under. Spoiler, they always thought it was trumpet 6. Never trumpet 1. No one ever caught the beginning of this movie. And if you weren't literate, which you probably weren't, you'd just rely on gossip, stained glass windows, and maybe an apocalyptic puppet show if you were lucky. Yes, those existed. Nothing says bedtime story like wooden puppets reenacting divine judgment. Sweet dreams, Timmy. Let's not forget the beasts. The Book of Revelation includes some pretty eye-catching monsters. Like the seven-headed dragon, for instance. That's not a metaphor to you. That's a real threat. Somewhere, out there, probably in a cave or under your cousin's bed, is a lizard with more heads than sense, waiting to make soup out of sinners. Then there's the beast from the sea, and the beast from the earth. One has 10 horns and 7 heads. The other talks like a dragon and makes statues come to life. Together, they're basically a medieval buddy comedy, if you replace the comedy with eternal damnation. And of course, there's the infamous mark of the beast. That's the bit where everyone is supposed to get a special mark on their hand or forehead in order to buy or sell things. Kind of like Amazon Prime, but with more flames. Medieval scholars debated what this meant. Some said it was literal branding. Others thought it was a spiritual mark. Others just refused to shop altogether and lived in caves eating moss. You know, just in case. You, of course, are terrified. Because you don't want to be marked. But also, you need bread. So you find yourself in that classic theological dilemma, eternal torment or mild starvation. The beauty, if we can call it that, of the medieval apocalypse is that it's everywhere. It's in your dreams, your artwork, your sermons, your dinner conversations, your local mystery plays, which are performed in the town square with great enthusiasm and questionable costumes. Every time someone sneezes too hard or a sheep is born with a funny toe, someone starts shouting about Revelation. You've learned to live with it. It's like background noise, but louder. And what did people do with all this fear? They prayed. A lot. They fasted. They joined religious movements that promised salvation. Some whipped themselves in public, a group known as the Flagellants, marching through towns, moaning, bleating, singing doomsday hymns, and generally ruining everyone's afternoon. Others wrote letters to the Pope demanding answers. Still others just panicked quietly, buried their money in the woods, and hoped the beast wouldn't notice them hiding under a log. And of course, there were always those who tried to calculate the exact date of the apocalypse. Using stars, numbers from the Bible, and whatever numerology they could invent, they'd declare, the world ends on April 4th, 1284. When that didn't happen, they'd say, wait, no, sorry, miscalculated. 1290, definitely 1290. When that didn't happen, they'd say, look, the important thing is that we stay ready. You, naturally, have no idea what year it is. So you return home. Your feet are soaked. Your hands are cracked. Your neighbor is carving a crucifix into his door, just in case. The wind howls. You light a candle and stare into the flame. You think about the beasts and the trumpets, and the sea of glass mingled with fire. You think about supper. You think about sleep. Because whether the world ends tonight or not, you still have chores tomorrow. And if the apocalypse does come, well, at least you won't have to shovel manure anymore. You wake up to shouting again. Not the usual tavern brawl or someone yelling at their goats. This is that specific kind of unhinged shouting that only happens when a holy relic has gone missing, a child is born with a tooth, or someone's convinced the Antichrist lives behind the cheese stall. You sigh, stretch, and pull your blanket of questionable cleanliness over your head. But it's no use. The shouting only gets louder. You hear snippets, the beast. The child with no shadow. He eats meat on Fridays. The last one especially damning. Because nothing screams servant of Satan like enjoying a sausage when you shouldn't. You finally emerge from your straw mattress, which smells faintly of mildew, livestock, and regret. The sun is rising, orange, hazy, and unervingly blood-like, as usual. Everything in the Middle Ages is a sign. Red sky. The end is nigh. A solar eclipse. Judgment is at hand. Your crops fail. Obviously divine wrath. Your tooth falls out. The devil is nibbling your bones from the inside. So you shuffle to the village square, where everyone is gathered, staring at poor Brother Raymond. He's a gaunt, silent monk with unfortunate eyebrows and a birthmark that looks vaguely like a serpent. Naturally, this means he's either cursed, prophetic, or Satan's barista. Now, medieval folks were obsessed with the Antichrist. Not just in the abstract sense, oh no, they were fixated. And not in the Marvel villain kind of way. More like, he's probably my cousin and I've been living with evil this whole time, and I knew it because he never washes his feet sort of way. And if you're imagining a suave, red-skinned horned figure with a cape and a penchant for jazz, no. The medieval Antichrist was often believed to be disgustingly human. A political figure, a charismatic preacher, a mysterious traveler, or that guy who keeps winning at dice even though his shoes are on the wrong feet. And let's talk about where he came from. Because the origin stories for the Antichrist were ambitious. Some said he'd be born of a Jewish virgin, but conceived with the help of a demon. That's right, the devil's immaculate conception, which is sort of like the worst parody of Christmas you've ever heard. Others believed he'd rise from Babylon, which medieval people were sure was anywhere east of your map's edge, past where dragons live and the sea just falls off. He was supposed to be brilliant, cunning, and utterly blasphemous. A master of deceit, capable of miracles. Like healing the sick, but for the wrong reasons. Like feeding the poor, but only to get their votes. Basically, he was described in ways that suspiciously resembled every powerful noble your village secretly resented. According to 12th century monk Adso of Montier-Ender, yes, that's a real name, not a cheese, the Antichrist would first be raised in hiding. He'd study scripture, not to understand it, but to weaponize it. Like a theological Sith Lord. Then he'd begin preaching. But unlike Jesus, he'd offer peace, prosperity, and miraculous wonders, just without the love, humility, or foot washing. Eventually, he'd claim to be the Messiah. Then he'd set up shop in Jerusalem, rebuild the temple, and perform a few suspiciously impressive miracles. He'd kill some prophets, declare himself divine, and demand worship. Which, in medieval terms, meant he probably installed better plumbing and offered tax breaks to merchants. Theologians were obsessed with this. Some said he'd reign for 3.5 years. Others said it'd be 7. A few optimists suggested less than a year, but let's be honest, nothing in the Middle Ages ends quickly, except happiness. And of course, there were signs. Oh, so many signs. The Antichrist was supposed to be born with teeth, already chewing the truth, obviously, speak from the womb, politicians start young, and have heterochromatic eyes. So if you happened to be born with an unusual gaze, you were either a witch, a prophet, or one minor tantrum away from being set on fire. Now, this belief wasn't just some late-night fireside speculation. This was serious business. Entire texts were written on how to identify the Antichrist, how to resist him, how to spot his followers. Spoiler, his followers are always the people you already didn't like. The Dominicans and Franciscans debated his arrival in universities. Popes wrote about it. Kings feared it. And peasants like you? You mostly tried not to make eye contact with that one guy in the next village who talked to birds and wore red shoes. So now, here in your muddy square, Brother Raymond is being accused because last night he sneezed 3 times in a row, didn't say Deus te benedicat, and then silently stared at the moon for 10 minutes. Which, in fairness, is suspicious. But more importantly, he once dropped a chalice, and no one ever forgets that. But the fear goes deeper. It's not just that the Antichrist might be walking among you, it's that you might accidentally support him, that your soul could be tricked, that you might follow a preacher who offers comfort in food and says all the right things, and only later realize you've doomed yourself to eternal suffering. It's like voting in an election, and only afterward learning your candidate plans to outlive bread. This fear of deception, of spiritual trickery, ran deep. And it wasn't baseless paranoia. Europe was politically unstable. The church was fragmented. Emperors and popes were constantly excommunicating each other. Every time a pope died, half the continent thought that was the Antichrist doing. Every time a child survived a plague, someone asked if they'd grow up to be the beast. Theologians like Joachim of Fiore started doing spiritual math, calculating the ages of the world like a holy version of Excel spreadsheets. They predicted we were entering the final age, the one with the Antichrist. Joachim said he'd come soon. Other scholars disagreed, but all agreed on one thing: it wasn't going to end with cake and fireworks. Even literature got in on the fear train. Apocalyptic plays became popular. Traveling preachers would act out the Last Judgment, often with terrifying masks, cardboard dragons, and smoke made from burning dampe. Children wept. Adults wept. Horses wept. Everyone wept. And somewhere in all of this madness, you live your life. You wake up. You walk to the fields. You hope it doesn't rain frogs. You see a mun with mismatched socks and whisper to your friend, Antichrist. You pray. You fast. You watch the sky for signs. A red moon? Surely the blood of martyrs. A thunderstorm? God is angry. A pig born with two tails? You immediately move to another village. And still, deep down, you wonder, is this it? Is he already here? And more importantly, what if you're the one who gets deceived? You light your candle at night. You whisper prayers in Latin you don't understand. You clutch your relics. A nail from St. Cuthbert. A splinter from the true cross. A feather that someone swore fell from an angel. You look out the window. The stars are bright. Too bright. Maybe that means something. Probably it does. But you pull your blanket over your head anyway, and you try to sleep. Because if the Antichrist is coming, he can wait until morning. You wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of screaming. Again. Only this time, it's not the usual kind of screaming, like someone accusing their neighbor of being a heretic because their chicken laid an egg with a red spot on it. No, this is the sky is literally falling variety, which, in the Middle Ages, means something very bad is happening. Or, more likely, appearing to happen, and nobody knows what it is but everyone's sure they're going to die. You stumble outside, still in your itchy woolen undertunic that somehow always smells like damp bread and old cabbage, and you look up. There it is, a fiery object streaking across the sky like a divine middle finger from God himself. It's a comet. You are now absolutely convinced the world is ending. And honestly, that makes sense. Because in the Middle Ages, comets were not cute astronomical events you watch while lying on a blanket with a charcuterie board. They were blazing, cosmic warnings that everything was about to fall apart. And you didn't even need to Google it, you just knew. Your local priest probably told you last week that comets were the flaming breath of God's fury. Or possibly the devil's torch. Or maybe both, depending on whether your priest has had his wine ration yet. Some monks even believed that the tails of comets pointed toward the next place that would be smitten. So everyone's staring at the sky and trying to figure out which direction the tail is pointing. Spoiler, it's pointing directly at your village. So before we go any further, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoyed this strange historical journey we are on together. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's staying up to fall asleep to medieval disaster. Now, let's talk about celestial doom. For the average medieval person, you don't really understand what the stars are. The sky is mysterious and full of fireflies that don't blink. The sun rises and sets because that's what it does. The moon sometimes disappears and comes back with no explanation. Solar eclipses? Terrifying. The sun goes out and you assume you did something wrong. You've probably been taught that the heavens are a giant crystalline sphere with little holes poked in it for starlight to shine through. Or maybe the stars are just lanterns held by angels. Either way, if something moves fast and burns across the sky, that's definitely not part of the plan. Medieval chroniclers were obsessed with recording comets and other weird sky things. In the year 1066, yes, the same year as the Norman conquest, a huge comet blazed through the sky for days. People in England lost their collective minds. And sure enough, soon after, William the Conqueror showed up, ruined everyone's week, and introduced a new tax system, which honestly might have been worse than the invasion. In the Bayeux Tapestry, the big embroidered comic strip of medieval chaos, you can actually see people pointing up at the comet in horror, next to a burning building and a very confused man holding a spear. It's basically the medieval version of a panic tweet. But it wasn't just comets. Meteor showers, eclipses, and blood moons were all considered omens. You didn't just shrug and go back to sleep. You immediately repented, fasted, gave away your favorite turnip, and told your neighbors everything you ever did wrong. Yes, even that time you stole a second piece of sacramental bread because you were hungry. Shame. The church had theories, too. Some theologians argued these events were warnings from God, but only the righteous would understand the message. So if you didn't get it, well, that's probably because you were doomed anyway. Meanwhile, early scientists, like the Islamic astronomers in places like Baghdad, Cordoba, and Damascus, were out here doing real calculations, charting orbits, predicting lunar eclipses. But back in your damp European village, all of that sounds suspicious and potentially witchcraft adjacent. After all, why would anyone want to understand the sky when you can just assume it's mad at you? Even the Pope would panic sometimes. In 1456, when Halley's Comet passed by again, Pope Calixtus III straight up ordered everyone to pray against it. He tried to excommunicate the comet. That's right, he fired a spiritual cease and desist order at a flaming rock in space. It did not respond. But it did pass over the Balkans just as the Ottomans were attacking Hungary. So the timing only deepened everyone's anxiety. Now let's take it a step further. Because not only are you afraid of the sky, you think the earth itself might open up and eat you. Earthquakes, wrath of God, volcanic eruptions, hell is bubbling over, floods, divine bathtub overflowing. Even if you live nowhere near a fault line, you've heard terrifying stories from distant lands, passed from terrified merchant to overdramatic monk. Mount Etna erupts? That's a hole straight into hell. Iceland's volcanoes send ash clouds over Europe? That's clearly Satan doing his laundry. And you, poor peasant with a cow named Bruna and a toothache that's lasted since last winter, are just trying to grow barley and not be incinerated. Worse, the sky often ties directly into apocalyptic prophecy. You've heard the priests preach from the book of Revelation, probably while yelling at you from a wooden pulpit that smells like mold and incense. They describe the four horsemen galloping across the land, bringing war, famine, plague, and death. And wouldn't you know it, you already have 3 of those. So you're just waiting on the war. And then you hear it. Not thunder. Not hoofbeats. Worse, trumpets. Or something that sounds like trumpets. Maybe a distant storm? Or the wind through the trees? Doesn't matter. The book of Revelation says the heavens will blow trumpets before the end. And your brain, which is mostly made of porridge and superstition, makes the leap immediately. It's happening. Of course, it's probably just Brother Cedric snoring in the next hut. He has sinus issues. But no one wants to take that risk. So now the whole village is praying, whipping themselves, and hiding under whatever resembles a table. This level of constant cosmic anxiety would probably drive a modern person to therapy. But in the Middle Ages, your only therapy is confession, leeches, and maybe drinking too much fermented goat's milk. And through it all, you keep going. You plant your fields under a sky that might catch fire. You marry your neighbor's daughter, even though she thinks stars are angels and once tried to catch one with a bucket. You attend Mass. You avoid comets. You flinch at eclipses. You name your children after saints in the hopes that God will spare them. And when the sky darkens again one summer afternoon, sun still overhead, but everything goes cold, you drop your tools, look around, and begin to quietly panic. Another eclipse. You gather with the others in the village square. No one speaks. You all just stare upward, the darkness swallowing the day like some monstrous celestial curtain. It lasts minutes. It feels like hours. Then the light returns. And you cheer. You're alive. For now. The world didn't end, again. But you still keep your funeral clothes neatly folded. Just in case. You sleep that night with one eye open. Your cow is missing again. There's a red ring around the moon. A distant wolf howls. You pray. You hope. Because maybe the world won't end tomorrow. But then again, maybe it will. You wake up with a rash. Not just any rash. It's a kind of rash that spreads fast, itches like betrayal, and according to the village midwife, definitely means you've either displeased God or slept too close to the goat again. Possibly both. But there's no time to ponder your personal hygiene sins because down the lane, someone's already wailing that their child has coughed blood onto the family's only blanket, and the dog has started twitching ominously. These are not good signs. You open your door, and the smell hits you. It's not the usual stew-meats-latrine combination. It's heavier, ranker. Like if death had a perfume line and someone spilled the whole bottle across town. Welcome to plague season. The Middle Ages didn't have a plague season, per se, but you'd be forgiven for thinking otherwise. Because when the Great Mortality, what we now call the Black Death, hit in 1347, it didn't just kill people. It broke the world. And yes, some folks thought it was the end of everything. The literal apocalypse. Not just because people were dying in heaps, but because everything that came with the plague screamed divine judgment. Let's start with the symptoms. You'd be fine in the morning. Maybe even chipper. Singing, skipping, arguing about whether Saint Apollonia could cure toothaches. Then by evening, your lymph nodes were swollen to the size of goose eggs. You were vomiting, feverish, delirious. Your skin turned dark purple. Your armpits smelled like despair and rotten onions. And the worst part? You knew exactly what was coming. Because by the time the Black Death reached your village, somewhere in France or England or the Holy Roman, wherever, you'd already heard the stories. Entire cities in Italy shut down. Dead bodies left in streets. Ships drifting into harbors full of corpses. And worse, priests dying. Which, in your medieval brain, is a very bad sign. If God's employees aren't safe, what hope do you have? The plague killed between 30% to 60% of Europe's population. That's not a typo. That's not some casual flu season. That's half the people you know are gone. Levels of catastrophe. Entire monasteries vanished. Villages were left abandoned. Fields went unplowed. Pigs wandered freely through cities, which honestly might have been the high point. And naturally, people assumed this was the end. After all, the book of Revelation said pestilence would ride in on a pale horse. And wouldn't you know it, there's a pale horse outside, chewing on a vegetable cart and looking suspiciously smug. Now, historians and doctors today know the Black Death was caused by Yersinia pestis, a bacteria carried by fleas on rats. But you don't know that. In fact, no one does. Germ theory won't exist for another 500 years. So the theories range from hilarious to horrifying. Some blame the Jews. Others blame the stars. Still more blame bad air, miasma, because the stink of a city clearly causes all problems. And then there are the ones who blame fashion. That's right. Some people said the plague was divine punishment for short tunics that expose the thighs. Because apparently, God draws the line at sexy knees. But while everyone's dying, people begin to lose it in very creative ways. Some flee to the countryside and live in caves. Others barricade themselves indoors, like proto-doomsday preppers, with no plumbing and too much dried fish. A few party until they drop, figuring if they're going to die, they might as well do it drunk and covered in gravy. Then there are the flagellants. You hear them before you see them, chanting, moaning, chains clinking. And then they appear, shirtless, barefoot, and bleeding. They march through the streets in grim processions, whipping themselves bloody with knotted cords, singing hymns, and crying out for mercy. They think if they punish themselves enough, God might spare the rest of humanity. Spoiler, it doesn't work. They just spread the plague faster. You, being a practical medieval person, relatively speaking, decide not to join the flagellants. You try herbs instead. Or incense. Or you hold a clove of garlic in your mouth while rubbing your chest with crushed emeralds. Don't ask why. Your apothecary has a thick accent and a limited understanding of human anatomy. Still, nothing helps. By this point, someone's dug a mass grave outside town. You've helped toss in a few bodies. You try not to look too long at their faces. You hope your name isn't next. And when the local priest gives a sermon about the plagues of Egypt, you can't help but wonder if maybe we're just doing the whole thing again, but this time without pyramids. In fact, the comparison isn't lost on anyone. People start rereading Exodus, squinting at the lines about frogs, flies, and boils. And wouldn't you know it, last week you saw 3 frogs in your water barrel and your neighbor's skin looks like poorly cooked dough. Coincidence? Definitely not. Then come the locusts. Yes, actual locusts. Because if you're going to have a plague, it might as well be biblical. The crops are already failing from neglect, everyone's too busy dying to weed the barley, and now a swarm of oversized insect descends like crunchy little demons from above. They eat everything. Your cabbage? Gone. Your beans? Gone. The last apple on the tree that was going to be your birthday treat? Also gone. People start seeing signs everywhere. A goat born with 2 heads. A fish with a human face. A cloud shaped like a skull. A child who speaks Latin without ever having learned it. Okay, that one's probably just a monk in disguise. Even the weather turns against you. Rain pours for days, flooding roads. Then weeks of sun bake the corpses until the entire village smells like a battlefield. Thunder roars without clouds. Lightning strikes the church tower. That's not metaphorical, it actually happens. Father Benedict survives but loses his eyebrows, and most of his sermons from that point on involve the phrase divine fire. Now, you don't expect much from life. You weren't promised comfort. You were promised heaven after death. But this feels excessive. You start to wonder, maybe God really is done with humanity. And maybe he's right. By now, you've stopped counting the days. You just exist in the space between death and soup. The local miller is dead. The baker, too. Bread has become a memory. You eat whatever you can find, roots, weeds, stale oats. Once, in a fit of hunger, you try roasted frog. It tastes like blasphemy and sadness. Then one day, the plague slows. Just a little. Fewer bodies. The crying stops. People begin peeking out of their homes again, like mice after a cat has passed. You gather in the church, not because you believe it's safe, but because there's nowhere else to go. The priest mumbles a thank you to God and then bursts into tears. You're alive. For now. But the fear never really goes away. Because deep down, everyone believes the plague wasn't just a disease. It was a warning. A preview. The first act in a much bigger play. And the next act? Fire. War. Judgment. And maybe, just maybe, a sky filled with angels and the opening of the seventh seal. So you go home. You light a candle. You whisper a prayer. And when you hear a distant cough outside, you blow the candle out and pretend to be asleep. Just in case. You wake up to silence. That, in itself, is terrifying. Because medieval silence doesn't mean peace. It means either A, someone is dead, B, someone is about to be dead, or C, a heretic is nearby and everyone's holding their breath. You step outside into the early morning fog. The village is still. A chicken clucks nervously, as if it too has heard the rumors. Because last night, Brother Oswin stood up during evening mass, face flushed from holy wine or possibly unholy mushrooms, and declared, "The Antichrist walks among us." He did this while pointing vaguely at the fishmonger's son, who admittedly does have a suspicious haircut. Now, if you're thinking, wait, wasn't that last week's apocalypse flavor, you're not wrong. But this one's different. This time, the end of days isn't coming from a comet or a boil or a really aggressive goat stampede. This time, it's personal. Enter the Antichrist. In the medieval mind, the Antichrist wasn't just a vague evil guy with bad skincare. He was real. He had a backstory, a prophecy, a purpose. He was going to show up right before the world ended, charm everyone with his lies, and lead the masses to eternal damnation. Think, evil Messiah meets medieval celebrity. And you? You're not ready. Because unlike in modern horror films where the villain shows up with theme music and glowing eyes, the Antichrist is supposed to be subtle. He might be handsome, persuasive, clean. He might use big words and not smell like manure. That alone is enough to raise suspicion in your village. Church scholars back then pored over every line of Revelation, Daniel, and whatever vaguely apocalyptic scribblings they could find, trying to pinpoint exactly how and when this unholy influencer would arrive. Some claimed he would be born from a Jewish woman in Babylon. Others said he'd rise out of Syria, or Rome, or perhaps your village. After all, the Thatcher's new apprentice has been suspiciously polite lately. And he has all his teeth. That can't be normal. So naturally, you panic. Because if the Antichrist is here, it means the Great Tribulation is coming. And nothing with the word tribulation in it is ever good. Let's break it down like your village elder tries to during his weekly end times lecture, usually given from atop a stump and accompanied by wild gesturing. First, the Antichrist will rise to power. He'll unite kingdoms, build temples, deceive even the righteous. Basically, he's the medieval version of a suspiciously charismatic politician. People will follow him because he promises peace, order, and maybe a functioning sewage system. Then come the 7 years of chaos. Famine, war, plague. Basically, the usual but more intense. And at some point during those 7 years, God will start sending really unsubtle messages, earthquakes, storms, trumpet sounds, and possibly literal horsemen. And all of this? It ends in the final battle. The big one. Good versus evil. Michael the Archangel versus every demon who didn't get the memo that their vacation days were revoked. fire raining from the sky, oceans turning to blood, and you, clutching a wooden spoon and some stale barley, hoping to be raptured before things get ugly. But here's the thing, everyone's got a different theory about when it's going to happen. You've heard the monk from 3 villages over say it'll be in the year 1000, because nice round numbers feel apocalyptic. And when that passed uneventfully, people said, wait, no, we meant 1033, the anniversary of Christ's death. That also came and went. Then people looked around and said, well, clearly it's coming soon, and promptly went back to accusing their neighbors of sorcery. It's like living in a perpetual pre-apocalypse sale where everything's terrible, but somehow still in stock. And don't get too comfortable, because theologians of the time love to get into the details. Some insisted the Antichrist would be raised in secret by demons in the wilderness. Others thought he'd study scripture, become a bishop, and slowly twist the truth. Some even believed he'd perform miracles, healing the sick, raising the dead, just like Jesus, but with slightly worse branding. And let's talk looks. Descriptions vary wildly. One text says he'll have heterochromia, 2 different colored eyes. Another says he'll be handsome, but have a terrible smell. One bishop claimed he would be of monstrous aspect but able to disguise himself with charisma and soft fabrics. So basically, a medieval pop star. Meanwhile, you, dear peasant, are left trying to figure out who this guy might be. Could it be the bishop who owns suspiciously many sheik? Could it be the new traveling merchant with silk robes and foreign spices? Could it be you? Yes. Self-doubt was a popular pastime. If you had a dream where you danced with a stranger or ate too much cheese, you might wake up convinced you were possessed. Even the church couldn't agree. Some thought the Antichrist was coming soon. Others said he'd already arrived. Still others suggested the Antichrist wasn't a person at all, but a system or even a kingdom. The Pope? The Holy Roman Emperor? The guy who keeps sneezing during Mass? All contenders. Things really heated up during times of political unrest. During the investiture controversy, when popes and emperors were fighting over who got to appoint bishops, each side accused the other of being under the influence of the Antichrist, which is very on brand for medieval diplomacy. Then there were plague years, famine years, war years, and bad wine years, all of which gave people yet another reason to believe the beast was on his way. You might even recall a wandering preacher who came through last month, barefoot and frothing at the mouth, declaring that the world would end by Michaelmas. That's September 29th. He also claimed cabbage was sinful, so not everyone took him seriously. Still, just in case, you buried your silver spoon and repented for kicking a goose. The irony, of course, is that the medieval obsession with the Antichrist helped shape the world it feared. People restructured their lives, laws, and logic to prepare for a future that never arrived. Entire apocalyptic sects formed. Some fled to mountaintops. Some built bunkers, holes in the ground, but it's the thought that counts. Some just waited, decade after decade, for a man who was always about to show up. So here you are. The sun is rising. The fog is lifting. Brother Oswin is asleep on the steps of the church, snoring with an open Bible on his face. The Antichrist hasn't arrived. Or maybe he has, and he's working in your local bakery, slowly corrupting society one overbaked loaf at a time. Either way, the world hasn't ended. Yet. But it might tomorrow. Better pray just in case. You wake up to a horn blast. Not the pleasant kind that means breakfast is ready or someone's found a new turnip patch. No, this one is deep, metallic, and vibrating through your bones like a cowbell made of thunder. It's happening. Someone runs by your window yelling, it's a first trumpet, which, in your half-asleep state, is confusing. You weren't aware there would be multiple trumpets. You also don't recall anyone giving you a schedule. But then again, this is the Middle Ages. There's no calendar app, just a village elder with a questionable sense of time and a cow bladder full of sand. So you throw on your tunic, grab your wooden spoon, your most reliable possession, and step outside, just in time to see the sun glowing red through a thick haze, birds flying in the wrong direction, and the village pigs forming what appears to be a loose circle of judgment. This is it. This is Revelation, the big one. Now, if you've ever cracked open the book of Revelation, not the cheerful parts, but the real meat, you'll know it reads like someone gave a doomsday prepper a quill, locked them in a cave, and said, make it spicy. And medieval people? They loved it. Because if you already live in a world of disease, famine, and theological threats, why not add Skyfire to your bucket list? So before we go further, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you genuinely enjoy this unhinged ramble through the apocalypse. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Is it midnight in Munich? Dawn in Detroit? Or are you hiding under a blanket at 3 a.m. hoping no one else heard the trumpet? All right. Let's dive into the end of all things. Revelation opens with letters to churches and mystical visions, but what really gets the medieval juices flowing is the bit with the 7 seals. Each seal broken equals a new catastrophe unlocked. Think of it as a divine advent calendar, but instead of chocolates, it's war and agony. Seal 1, the white horse. A conqueror with a crown and a bow. Not the Antichrist, necessarily, but maybe his opening act. Seal 2, the red horse. War, bloodshed, conflict. As if your village wasn't already arguing over oat prices. Seal 3, the black horse. Famine. The rider holds a pair of scales, which is ominous, because medieval people only use scales for 2 things, measuring wheat and judging your soul. Seal 4, the pale horse. Death himself. With hell following close behind, like a very clingy ex. By the time the 6th seal breaks, the sky is rolling up like a scroll, the sun turns black, and the moon turns to blood. Also, stars start falling from the sky like celestial dandruff. All in all, not a great Tuesday. But it's when we hit the 7 trumpets that things start to feel truly biblical in the "is that a flaming mountain or just Monday again" kind of way. Trumpet 1, hail and fire, mixed with blood. Falls on the earth, burning a third of the trees and all green grass. Yes, all the grass. Even your sad little goat field. You watch it vanish in a puff of flaming hay, and scream internally because now the livestock are going to eat your thatch roof. Trumpet 2, a great mountain, burning with fire, is thrown into the sea. This sounds like a metaphor, but medieval chroniclers took it very literally. Some believed an actual mountain would yeet itself into the ocean. Others said it was a volcano, or maybe a particularly moody angel. Either way, 1/3 of sea life dies. Also, ships are destroyed. If you're a coastal peasant, this is the part where you stare at the horizon and wonder if fishing was ever really worth it. Trumpet 3, a great star falls from heaven. Wormwood is its name. It poisons a third of the rivers and springs. At this point, you're down to 1 water source and a hope that your neighbor hasn't bathed in it. Spoiler, he has. Trumpet 4, a third of the sun, moon, and stars go dark. Which is a dramatic way of saying it's really, really hard to farm now. Also, your circadian rhythm is now completely shot. You start sleeping in 47-minute cycles and dreaming of fruit you'll never eat again. Then there's an intermission. A pause. An angel appears, flying through the sky, yelling, "Woe! Woe! Woe to the inhabitants of the earth!" That's right. Even heaven is using dramatic transitions now. Then comes Trumpet 5. Oh boy. Trumpet 5, the bottomless pit opens. Smoke pours out like a furnace, and out of the smoke come locusts. But not regular locusts. Oh no. These locusts are the stuff of medieval nightmares. They have human faces, lion's teeth, scorpion tails, and the power to torture people for 5 months, but not kill them. Their wings sound like many chariots, thundering into battle. If you're imagining something between a Renaissance painting and a bad acid trip, you're on the right track. Trumpet 6, 4 angels are released from the Euphrates. They command an army of 200 million horsemen. Their horses breathe fire, smoke, and sulfur. A third of mankind dies. Just in case you were getting too comfortable. By now, everyone in your village is either A, hiding in the church, B, in full repentance mode, or C, starting a doomsday cult involving cabbage. You personally are just trying to keep your tuna clean. Now, Trumpet 7 is the final trumpet. You expect it to bring annihilation. Instead, it announces the kingdom of God, which sounds nice. Except it's immediately followed by lightning, voices, thunder, an earthquake, and a great hailstorm. Because God, like most ancient deities, enjoys flair. So you sit by the fire, eating what might be your last bowl of barley mush, wondering what comes next. And if Revelation is to be believed, the answer is a lot more chaos. Because we haven't even talked about the dragon yet. Yes, there's a dragon. A red one with 7 heads and 10 horns. He appears in heaven, tries to eat a newborn child, and gets into a brawl with Michael the archangel. The child is whisked away, the dragon is hurled to earth, and you start questioning your diet again because none of this seems medically sound. Then there's the beast that rises from the sea. Covered in blasphemous names, with 10 horns and 7 heads. This one gets his power from the dragon. People worship him, because apparently we just love bad decisions. And if that wasn't enough, another beast rises from the earth, this one with 2 horns like a lamb but a voice like a dragon. He performs miracles. He makes an image speak. And he introduces a fun little system known as the mark of the beast. That's right. You can't buy or sell without it. In modern times, conspiracy theorists love to link this to credit cards, barcodes, or your cousin's suspicious ankle tattoo. But in your world, it probably means an actual brand seared into your forehead. Very fashionable, very painful, very irreversible. At this point, your village has split into factions. One group is preparing for martyrdom. One is trying to decode the number 666 by assigning numeric values to every person's name. One guy has declared himself the third beast and is now eating only garlic and yelling at trees. You, sensibly, have decided to hide in your neighbor's goat shed and wait it out. It's not comfortable. It smells like damp wool and hay farts. But it's better than being trampled by a horse that breathes sulfur. So you curl up, listen to the wind, and wonder, if this is the end of the world. Why does it sound so familiar? Because maybe, just maybe, the end times aren't about the future at all. Maybe they're just medieval people trying to make sense of their world, full of suffering, injustice, mystery, and the constant possibility of being flattened by a falling star. And maybe you'll wake up tomorrow and it'll all be fine. Or maybe the 7th bowl will pour out and the rivers will turn to blood. Either way, you're strangely calm. Because in the Middle Ages, you don't expect happy endings. Just slightly less terrible mornings. You wake up to the sound of croaking. Not the gentle, romantic kind, like frogs singing under moonlight, but the loud, chorus of doom variety. There are frogs in your bed. Frogs in your shoes. Frogs raining from the actual sky. Either nature is malfunctioning again, or someone's been quoting the book of Exodus too aggressively in their morning prayers. You sit up slowly, rubbing your eyes, hoping it's a dream. It's not. There's a monk outside yelling, "The bowls are being poured out." Ah yes, the bowls. You'd nearly forgotten, what with the locusts, horses, dragon battles, and your personal crisis over whether turnips are a sin. But in medieval apocalyptic lore, just when you think you've survived everything, trumpets, seals, beasts with too many heads, God brings out his piece de resistance, the 7 bowls of wrath. Because when you're omnipotent, you don't just end the world. You serve it. And each of these bowls, it's like the universe took a medieval what-if list and said, let's try all of them. So you sit quietly, swatting a frog off your knee, and brace yourself. Bowl 1. Painful sores break out on everyone with the mark of the beast. You don't have the mark, but you still check under your tunic. Just in case. Because medieval medicine doesn't exactly cover divine boils. You ask the village healer what to do, and she hands you a clove of garlic and whispers, repent harder. Bowl 2. The sea turns to blood, killing everything in it. You try not to panic. You don't live next to the sea. But someone swears they saw a fish with 3 eyes and a bleeding gill floating near the village well. You were going to have fish stew for supper. Now you're eating your last handful of stale oats and hoping the cows don't start bleeding next. Bowl 3. Rivers and springs turn to blood too. You stare into your bucket. It's not quite red. More of a suspicious brown. Possibly just dirt. Possibly divine wrath. Either way, it's definitely not drinkable. And you remember with horror that Brother Oswin bathed in it yesterday. Bowl 4. The sun scorches people with fire. Yes, the sun. The source of life, now weaponized like a cosmic blowtorch. You watch as farmers drop their tools and sprint for the shade of the chapel, where the thatch roof is actively smoldering. You wonder if this is God's version of no sunscreen? Too bad. Bowl 5. Darkness. Not the usual nighttime darkness. This one is palpable. People gnaw their tongues in agony, which is either a poetic metaphor or a very real dental hazard. It's the kind of pitch black you feel in your bones. No candles help. The shadows move wrong. Even the frogs go quiet. You sit in it, clutching your wooden spoon like it's a holy relic. And then the real drama begins. Bowl 6, the Euphrates dries up. To you, a simple peasant, that means nothing. You've never seen the Euphrates. You can barely spell it. But the monks assure you this is very bad. Because now the kings of the East can march straight into Armageddon. Not the metaphorical kind. The actual place. Megiddo. A dusty little valley in the Holy Land where all the final prophecies are supposed to unfold. The fact that you're nowhere near it doesn't seem to matter. Apparently, Armageddon has satellite coverage. Then come the three evil spirits. Frogs again, but possessed. They leap from the mouths of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. They go out to deceive the nations, gathering them for the final war. They probably also ruin your cabbage field, because of course they do. Bowl 7, the final act. A loud voice from the temple says, "It is done." Then, lightning, thunder, the biggest earthquake the world has ever seen. Mountains flatten, islands vanish, cities crumble. Hailstones the size of talents, about 75 pounds, crash from the sky. People scream, curse, and throw themselves into the dirt. You just sit there, covered in soot, half deaf, holding your soup bowl like it's a shield, wondering how something can both end and yet keep going. Because the world doesn't quite end. Not yet. You wake up the next day. The sun still rises. The pigs are still grunting. Brother Oswin is snoring under the altar again. A child kicks a frog into a barrel. Life, somehow, continues. And that's the problem. In the medieval mind, the apocalypse wasn't a single event. It was a state of almost. A constant readiness. The spiritual equivalent of holding your breath for centuries. Always preparing. Never quite arriving. And they loved to imagine it. Scribes wrote whole books on what the final judgment would sound like. They described trumpets that shook the bones of the dead. Angels with scrolls longer than a castle wall. Fire rolling across the earth like it was late to a wedding. There's even a genre, vision literature. People like the monk Ailbe or the nun Hildegard of Bingen had vivid, disturbing dreams about the end. Hildegard once wrote about mountains melting and a massive black dog representing corruption. Because apparently even Judgment Day needs mascots. They painted it too. On cathedral walls and under altars, artists depicted the saved rising toward light and the damned being carried off by demons with very bad personal hygiene. One famous fresco shows sinners being boiled, eaten, then boiled again. Just in case you weren't sure how sin works. And the imagery? Let's just say medieval artists didn't do subtle. There are angels with swords the size of windmills. Saints riding on clouds. Jesus appearing in blinding light, usually barefoot, because judgment requires breathable footwear. The dead rise from graves with very confused expressions, holding their own skulls like awkward party favors. And yet, even with all that, people didn't fear the apocalypse like we imagine. They longed for it. Because in a world of endless toil, war, injustice, and terrible cheese, the idea of God stepping in and fixing everything, that was hope. A strange, flaming, frog-covered kind of hope. You might find it absurd. You might think, why would anyone want the world to end in fire and beasts and apocalyptic hail? But think about it. In a world where you die young, bleed for the church, and spend your nights coughing into straw, the idea of divine justice, true justice, is the only kind that feels real. Because your Lord isn't just. Your king isn't fair. Your priest might be stealing your sheep. But God sees everything. And someday, He's going to flip the table. So Judgment Day becomes more than just an ending. It's a correction, a reboot, a final accounting where the proud are humbled, the poor are lifted, and that guy who took your last radish finally gets what's coming to him. And you? Well, you've confessed. You've prayed. You fasted, kind of. You even forgave that girl who stole your spindle and married your crush. So maybe you'll make it. You close your eyes. A frog croaks softly beside you. Somewhere, a trumpet echoes. But for now, the sky is quiet. And you drift off to sleep just in case tomorrow really is the end. Or maybe it's just Wednesday again. You wake up. Not in your bed. Not even in your straw-covered corner of the barn you've reluctantly started calling home since the rats got more aggressive in the kitchen. No, you wake up in a field. The sky is purple. Not metaphorically. Literally. Somewhere between grape jam and bruised saint. You don't remember how you got here. You don't remember anything after the loud thunder last night and the village priest shouting something about the son of perdition. Which isn't a local troublemaker. It's the Antichrist. Yes, that Antichrist. The big one. The biblical villain. The final boss of Christian eschatology. The medieval world's equivalent of Voldemort, Darth Vader, and your least favorite in-law all rolled into one. He has arrived. And no one is quite sure what to do about it. Some monks swear he's already ruling from a hidden city in the east. Others say he was born in Babylon and raised by demons in a cave, because naturally. A few claim he's Jewish or Greek or French, which really just tells you how much medieval people hated the French. But wherever he's from, the important part is, he's here. And he's going to pretend to be Jesus. Yes. According to the most popular medieval legends, the Antichrist won't show up with devil horns and a trident. That would be far too convenient. No, he arrives looking holy, charismatic, beautiful, probably with very shiny teeth. He'll perform miracles. He'll raise the dead, some say just to mock God. He'll levitate, because of course he does, and give grand speeches full of hope and righteousness. And people will believe him. Like, a lot of people. Enough to make TikTok jealous. And you're not sure what to think. On one hand, he just turned your empty barley sack into actual bread. On the other, he also turned your neighbor's sheep into fire. Which seems mixed. Let's rewind a bit. In medieval Europe, the concept of the Antichrist was everywhere. He was the boogeyman of theology, the literal enemy of Christ. But he wasn't just some abstract idea. He was detailed, personal. Scholars wrote entire books on his career path. And it goes something like this. He'll be born of a virgin, but not in a holy way. In the opposite of a holy way. Some say his father is the devil. Others say it's just a very bad person who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Either way, his mother is often described as less than thrilled. He'll grow up rapidly. Some versions say he can speak from the womb, which, frankly, is horrifying. He'll learn every language, quote every scripture, and dazzle scholars with his genius. At age 12, he'll start preaching. Sound familiar? Yes. Because he's mimicking Jesus in every way, but with significantly more smiting. By 30, he's leading armies. He has a crown. He's performing miracles that make your local saints look like birthday clowns. He even raises the dead, though people come back with complaints. One woman reportedly rose from her tomb just to slap him and collapse again. Respect. At some point, he declares himself God. That's when the real fireworks begin. He builds a throne in Jerusalem. Or maybe Rome. Or maybe both. Geography was never medieval Europe's strong suit. He demands worship. He bans Christianity. He persecutes the faithful, burns scriptures, and makes everyone wear his mark. It's like the worst Black Friday sale imaginable. But here's where it gets worse. He doesn't look evil. No sulfur. No horns. No cape made from human regrets. Just a very well-dressed man with terrifying charisma, suspiciously good hair, and the kind of confidence that makes you question your own dog. And you just want to know what's going on. Is he God? The miracles say yes. Is he the devil? The burning sheep says also yes. The confusion is widespread. Monks, peasants, nobles, everyone has theories. Some say he's the Pope. Others say he will be the Pope. A few whisper that he's actually a king, a sorcerer, or even a really ambitious merchant from Genoa. Again, we learn more about who people hated than who the Antichrist was. So how do you spot him? Theologians offer helpful checklists. Like, can he walk through fire without burning? Does he deny the Trinity? Is he suspiciously good at public speaking? Does he make you feel both inspired and slightly itchy? If yes, he might be the Antichrist. If no, he might just be your tax collector. Medieval stories get creative here. In one popular tale, the Antichrist builds a tower of fire and dares the heavens to strike him. God responds by sending Enoch and Elijah, the two prophets who never died, to challenge him in public. Yes, it becomes a theological WWE match. They argue for days. The Antichrist performs wonders. Enoch and Elijah perform counter-wonders. People start taking sides. There's cheering, hissing. Someone sells cheese. Eventually, the Antichrist kills both prophets. Everyone gasps. He celebrates. And then, they rise from the dead. Again, like holy zombies. And they point at the Antichrist, dramatically, as the sky begins to crack open. Because guess what? That's the final straw. Enter the real Jesus. He doesn't levitate. He descends, with clouds, trumpets, a sword, and more glowing light than a Marvel movie finale. And he does not look amused. The Antichrist tries to run. Spoiler, he doesn't make it far. Jesus breathes on him, and he explodes. According to some texts, literally explodes. Because divine breath is apparently flammable now. And just like that, it's over. You look around. The sky is blue again. The frogs have left. The sheep have resolidified. People are hugging, crying, praying, or just sitting in the dirt trying to process whatever that was. You feel oddly peaceful. Because after all that, the deception, the fear, the flaming sermons, it finally makes sense. The Antichrist wasn't just a villain. He was everything you were afraid might be true. That your suffering meant nothing. That evil always wins. That the world is a lie and hope is a scam. But he lost. And now, maybe, just maybe, something better begins. Or not. Because in the medieval imagination, the story isn't quite over. Judgment still awaits. One more chapter. One final scene. But for now, you lie down in the grass. There are no frogs. No fire. No terrifying sermons echoing from nearby towers. Just wind. And the quiet sense that for the first time in a long time, the world isn't ending today. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe never. But at least for now, you can rest. You wake up to trumpet blasts. Not a nice trumpet, either. This is not the jazzy kind you hear at weddings. It's more like if the sky was screaming into a megaphone tuned to apocalyptic panic. The kind of sound that makes your teeth itch and your past sins start crawling up your spine. You sit bolt upright. You're naked. So is everyone else. You look around and see a whole crowd of people, peasants, lords, monks, knights, children, old women, even your second cousin who supposedly died of superlated injuries in 1134, all just standing there. Also naked. No one is embarrassed. Mostly because everyone is too distracted by the fact that the sky is splitting in half. This, my friend, is the final judgment. The big one. The moment medieval people spent their whole lives imagining, dreading, hoping for, and using as an excuse to shame each other into behaving. And guess what? It's finally happening. You are currently standing on what looks like the world's largest wheat field, but without the wheat. The sky has cracked open like a poorly baked pie, and from it descends something so bright, you instinctively try to cover your eyes, except, again, you have no clothes. So your hands are doing double duty. There's a throne up there, floating, massive, surrounded by fire and lightning and eyes that aren't attached to heads. There's a rainbow above it, which feels weirdly cheerful given the vibe. And on the throne, Christ. Not baby Jesus. Not gentle Jesus, meek and mild. No, this is cosmic Jesus. Judgment Jesus. The version with flame in his eyes, a sword coming out of his mouth, don't ask how that works, and a book. A big book. Your name might be in it. You hope it's spelled correctly. All around you, the dead are rising. You see bones reassembling into skeletons, which then get wrapped in flesh like reverse meat origami. It's disturbing and fascinating at the same time, sort of like watching someone eat oysters for the first time. The sea gives up its dead. Tombs burst open like angry pastries. Even that guy who was definitely cremated is somehow reforming from cosmic dust, looking extremely disoriented and mildly irritated. You try to remember how many sins you confessed. You think back to the time you stole a chicken, lied about fasting, and told everyone Brother Jerome was secretly an ogre in disguise. You regret at least 2 of those things. Probably. It's all a blur now. There are angels everywhere. Thousands. Some with wings. Some with faces on their wings. Some with wheels for bodies, spinning and covered in eyes, like God hired a surrealist sculptor during a thunderstorm. They're carrying scrolls, trumpets, scales. Some are just singing, but in that kind of shanty, spine-tingling way that sounds like a cathedral is slowly swallowing itself. And then, One angel steps forward. He opens the book of life. You stop breathing. You weren't ready. You were never ready. You haven't even brushed your hair, and now an immortal being is about to read your soul like a grocery list. The judgment begins. And it is very thorough. Every person is brought forward. Angels read your name, your deeds, your intentions. It's like God is hosting an eternal version of performance reviews, but with more weeping and significantly more fire. You watch as kings are cast down, peasants are lifted up, and that smug merchant who always charged extra for lentils is absolutely not on the good list. The criteria? Complex. Not just what you did, but why you did it. Whether you repented. Whether you helped others. Whether you believed, hoped, loved, and didn't spend your entire life being a selfish jerk. It's a cosmic audit. There are scales, too. In some versions, your deeds are literally weighed, good on one side, evil on the other. Some people cheer when their scale tips to the right. Others burst into flame. One man's scale balances exactly, and a confused angel just shrugs and tosses him into a waiting room. And yes, the devil is there. He's in chains, watching, grinning, muttering rude things about your haircut. He doesn't get to judge, he's being judged too. But that doesn't stop him from throwing shade like a medieval drama queen. Also present, demons. They're lurking, hopeful, watching like aggressive insurance salesmen waiting for the moment you're declared denied eternal coverage. But if you're judged righteous, if your name is in that book, you're invited to the other place. The good one. Heaven. And what is heaven? In the medieval imagination. Gold streets. Pearly gates. Eternal feasting. Singing choirs. No leprosy. No taxes. No famine. No sermons about sin. Just bliss. And not the modern kind that involves spa robes and scented candles. The divine kind, pure love, light, and a front row seat to eternal holiness. There are flowers that don't wilt. Fruit that tastes like joy. Music that doesn't repeat. Time doesn't exist, and somehow you finally understand Latin. Oh, and angels hand you clothes. Thank God. But if you're not righteous, if your life was one long parade of pride, cruelty, gluttony, or being mean to cats, hell. And hell is a lot. Medieval people were deeply creative about damnation. There are rivers of fire, lakes of boiling pitch, mountains made of knives. One famous painting shows a man being eaten by a demon who also has another man hanging out of his nose. Fun. You might be chained, roasted, frozen, or flayed. Not just for the crimes you did, but for what you wanted to do and didn't. Because in God's economy, intent matters. And hell isn't temporary. You don't work your way out. This isn't spiritual detention. It's a forever sentence. Eternal. Loud. Smelly. Crowded. No exits. No silence. Just regret, despair, and whatever music you personally find most annoying on a loop. But despite all that terror, the point of the judgment wasn't just fear. It was hope. In a world where justice was rare, where the rich oppressed the poor, where sin seemed to win and good people died alone, the final judgment was a promise. That everything would be made right. That every injustice would be corrected. That suffering wasn't ignored. That sacrifice wasn't wasted. That somewhere beyond this muddy, painful life, there was a judge who truly saw it all. And so people clung to that hope. They carved it into stone, painted it on ceilings, wove it into poems and prayers and lullabies, so that when the trumpet sounded, they could rise from their graves not in fear, but with relief, with awe, with wonder, and maybe, just maybe, with joy. Because after the books are closed, after the sheep and goats are separated, after the final flame flickers out, there's silence, and peace, and light, and rest. You lie down in the tall grass again. The wind is cool. The angels are singing something soft now, something gentle. You think you hear your name. You don't open your eyes. Because maybe, just maybe, this is the end. Or the beginning. But either way, you're finally home.